Oui, vous pouvez la garder. Je n'ai pas envie de la voir. Sur cette photo, il a un regard froid, vide. On devine comme un début de sourire en coin. Je connais ce regard. Je l'ai déjà vu. Je le connais bien. On n'y voit aucune émotion, rien. C'est comme s'il était vide à l'intérieur. Je n'ai jamais vu une telle haine, une telle cruauté chez un être humain, s'il mérite même qu'on l'appelle ainsi. Cette photo est très parlante, très révélatrice. Donc non, je n'aime pas la regarder. Combien de fois j'ai entendu des gens dire « Ce n'est qu'un enfant » ou « Ce pauvre gamin ». Ça me rend malade. Ils ne savent pas de quoi ils parlent. Ils ne savent pas ce qui s'est passé, ce qui se cache derrière cette façade. Ils ne savent pas ce qu'il a fait. Ce n'est pas un gamin apeuré. C'est un de monstre. C'est une photo de Nita et de Chance. Ils devaient avoir presque 2 ans sur cette photo. On voit bien à quel point elle était contente d'être mère. Elle était très heureuse à ce moment-là. Chance était l'amour de sa vie. Toute son existence tournait autour de lui. Nita était tellement jeune. Elle avait 17 ans quand elle est tombée enceinte de Chance. Et elle en avait 18 quand il est né. Ce n'est pas un hasard si elle a choisi de l'appeler Chance. Elle était hantée par les fantômes de son passé, de notre enfance et elle l'a appelé comme ça parce qu'elle a dit que la vie lui donnait une deuxième chance avec cet enfant et qu'elle allait tout faire pour être une bonne mère, parce que c'était tout pour elle. Mais avec le recul, je ne crois pas qu'il mérite ce prénom. Pendant des années, Nita s'est battue contre les démons de son passé. Elle était marquée par les sévices qu'elle avait subis aux mains des trafiquants. C'était une lutte incessante, quotidienne pour elle. À cette époque, Nita travaillait et essayait de se construire une vie meilleure. Mais dès qu'elle commençait à sortir la tête de l'eau, il lui arrivait toujours quelque chose. Chance avait environ 2 ans quand Nita a perdu sa garde. Elle l'a très mal vécu. Ça l'a anéantie. À ce moment-là, notre mère et notre beau-père ont réussi à obtenir la garde temporaire de Chance. Nita n'arrêtait pas de me demander s'il allait bien. Elle voulait que je lui promette de m'occuper de lui, de veiller sur lui. Il y avait une telle détresse chez elle que je lui ai promis... Je lui ai promis que je veillerais toujours sur lui. Je crois que ça a eu énormément d'impact sur Chance, toute cette période où il a vécu avec ma mère et mon beau-père. Nita venait le voir dès qu'elle le pouvait. Elle appelait et demandait à le voir, et on lui répondait « Oh, on n'est pas là cette semaine, tu ne peux pas venir. » Ou « On est occupé ce week-end, tu ne peux pas venir. » Je suis sûre que ça a eu des répercussions sur Chance. Il a peut-être cru que sa mère l'avait abandonné. Je lui ai expliqué que ce n'était pas que sa mère ne voulait pas le voir, mais que c'était compliqué. Heureusement, je n'habitais pas très loin de chez ma mère, donc j'allais le voir tous les jours. On faisait beaucoup de choses tous les deux. On allait au cinéma, on faisait du quad. On était tout le temps ensemble. Je ne pouvais pas remplacer sa mère, mais je pouvais au moins être là pour lui. On avait une chienne quand Chance était petit. Il la caressait, passait du temps avec elle. Elle dormait souvent avec lui quand il habitait là-bas. Elle a fini par être vieille et par mourir. Chance devait avoir 9 ans à l'époque. Je me demandais comment j'allais lui annoncer ça. Comment lui expliquer pour qu'il comprenne. Je voulais qu'il sache qu'il n'y avait aucune honte à pleurer. Assieds-toi, mon grand. On lui a donc dit de s'asseoir et on lui a annoncé qu'elle était morte. Et c'était bizarre parce que son regard était vide, sans émotion. Je m'attendais à ce qu'il pose des questions, qu'il me demande ce qui s'était passé, où elle était. Je m'attendais à une réaction, mais il s'en fichait en fait. Tu as des questions? Ça m'a quand même surprise. Mais sur le coup, je me suis dit que c'était peut-être sa façon à lui de réagir, qu'il allait garder ça dans un coin de sa tête et gérer ça tout seul de son côté. Quand j'y repense, je me dis que ce n'était pas normal. Il n'a eu aucune émotion, aucune empathie. Et c'est quelque chose que l'on a remarqué à plusieurs reprises quand il était enfant. Ça ne nous a pas vraiment interpellés à l'époque. Mais avec le recul, c'est clair que c'était assez typique de sa part. J'ai toujours souhaité que Nita et lui soient réunis. C'est quelque chose que j'ai toujours voulu. Donc j'étais très contente. À l'époque, elle était enceinte d'un deuxième petit garçon. Elle en était encore au tout début de sa grossesse. Elle était heureuse à l'idée d'avoir ces 2 garçons avec elle, de pouvoir les élever tous les 2. Chance avait hâte de montrer ses livres au bébé et de lui lire des histoires. Il était content à l'idée d'être un grand frère. Je ne l'avais jamais vu aussi heureux. Et bien sûr, on était tous très heureux à l'idée d'accueillir ce petit garçon. Je sais qu'il la soupçonnait de se droguer. Et ils sont donc intervenus et ils lui ont retiré le bébé sur la base de soupçons complètement infondés. Mais Nita avait toujours Chance. Ils lui ont laissé Chance. Nita a tout de suite pris un avocat. Elle était déterminée à se battre. Je me souviens qu'on était au tribunal et qu'une des assistantes sociales lui a dit qu'il valait mieux qu'elle place ce bébé à l'adoption. Parce que si ça devait recommencer, si elle devait revenir au tribunal, il finirait par lui prendre son aîné, Chance.
Vous n'êtes pas en mesure d'élever un nouveau-né.
Je la vois encore. Elle a tapé des 2 mains sur la table.
Ce sont de fausses accusations. Nita.
Elle a dit qu'elle ne pouvait pas faire ça. Elle était anéantie.
Je ne peux pas faire ça.
Elle pleurait. Je la vois encore se saisir de ce stylo, signer les documents et s'en aller. Ça lui a brisé le cœur de signer ces papiers. Ils étaient imbibés de ses larmes. On venait de lui dire que si elle continuait à se battre, elle allait perdre ses 2 enfants. Elle a eu l'impression de ne pas avoir le choix. Je crois qu'elle s'est sentie vaincue et qu'elle s'est crue obligée de faire ça pour protéger Chance. Je sais que Chance s'était effondré quand il a appris la nouvelle. Il a eu le cœur brisé.
Je suis désolée, mon cœur. Il nous retire le bébé.
Avec le recul, je me rends compte que c'est ce jour-là que j'ai vu Chance exprimer le plus d'émotions. Je crois que c'est la toute première fois où je l'ai vu pleurer. Il a vraiment pleuré à chaudes larmes pour ce bébé. Chance savait que Nita avait dû faire un choix ce jour-là. Et c'est à partir de ce moment-là qu'il a commencé à avoir des accès de rage.
Comment t'as pu les laisser faire ça?
Chance n'a pas mis longtemps à le lui reprocher, à lui dire qu'elle aurait dû se battre pour ce bébé. Il s'en servait presque comme d'une arme. C'était sa façon de l'atteindre. Il lui disait qu'elle avait perdu son frère. Il savait exactement quoi lui dire pour lui faire du mal. Le Chance que j'avais connu petit garçon et le Chance qu'il est devenu n'avaient rien à voir. C'est comme s'il était passé de l'autre côté tout à coup. Un jour, je leur ai rendu visite et quand je suis arrivée, Nita était contrariée.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
Elle m'a dit que Chance avait eu des ennuis à l'école. Chance lui avait raconté qu'il avait planté un crayon dans le cou de quelqu'un. Je n'en revenais pas.
C'est pas vrai.
Je lui ai demandé si l'école l'avait exclu, si la police était impliquée, si l'autre élève était gravement blessé. Je lui ai posé toutes ces questions et elle l'a même dit « Non, la police n'est pas impliquée ». Mais s'il avait planté un crayon dans le cou d'un autre élève, bien sûr que la police aurait été impliquée. On a fini par en conclure que ça n'était pas arrivé. Mais le plus inquiétant, c'est qu'il avait inventé toute cette histoire. Et s'il avait inventé tout ça, c'est qu'il avait le fantasme de faire du mal à quelqu'un. J'ai appris de ses amis qu'il racontait avoir frappé quelqu'un avec la crosse d'une arme à feu ou avoir pris part à toutes sortes de bagarres qui n'avaient jamais eu lieu. Clairement, la mort, la violence le faisaient fantasmer. Un soir, je suis passée chez Nita pour voir comment ça allait et ils se disputaient.
Tu ne peux pas traiter les gens comme ça, Chance.
Elle n'était pas contente parce qu'il avait des ennuis à l'école. Il manquait de respect à ses professeurs ou... Je ne me souviens plus exactement. Nita, pour la première fois à ma connaissance, a su rester ferme. Elle l'a puni.
Pas de jeux vidéo, pas d'internet, rien.
Il a commencé à lui parler très mal.
Tu crois que je te respecte?
Chance avait l'habitude de crier. Il lui a sorti un truc du genre qu'il n'en avait rien à de ce qu'elle disait. Elle lui a répondu qu'il n'allait pas lui parler comme ça.
Je te déteste!
Non, tu ne parles pas à ta mère comme ça.
Il lui a dit que c'était à cause d'elle s'il n'avait pas son frère avec lui. Chance l'a fixé avec des yeux pleins de colère. Comme si elle n'était rien pour lui. Ça aurait dû nous alerter. Elle l'a regardé dans les yeux et je me souviens qu'elle a reculé. C'était comme s'il s'était transformé en monstre en l'espace d'une seconde. Son regard, son petit sourire en coin, il avait l'air presque arrogant, trop sûr de lui. Sur le coup, ça m'a un peu déconcertée. C'était assez choquant. Ça fait partie de ces moments où je me suis demandé si Nita était en sécurité avec Chance. À peu près à cette époque, Nita a commencé à fréquenter un homme merveilleux qui la traitait bien. Nita était très amoureuse. C'était exactement le genre d'homme que j'aurais choisi pour ma sœur si j'avais pu. Nita vivait avec lui à ce moment-là. Quand on voit sa sœur avoir tellement de mauvaises expériences avec les hommes et que tout à coup elle rayonne, je crois que Nita était vraiment heureuse pour une fois. Et elle méritait de l'être. Tout a changé le soir où Nita m'a appelée. Elle était dans tous ses états quand je suis arrivée. Elle m'a dit que la veille, Chance et elle s'étaient disputés devant chez eux.
J'y crois pas.
Je t'ai dit que je sortais avec un ami.
Chance était à 2 centimètres d'elle. Il lui hurlait dessus et je crois qu'il l'a poussée.
Je te déteste.
Son petit ami s'est interposé. Il a dit à Chance qu'il ne pouvait pas manquer de respect à sa mère comme ça. Et Chance lui a donné un coup de poing au visage.
Quoi? Quoi?
Nita pleurait. Mais lui était surexcité. Il sautait dans tous les sens. Il hurlait.
Tu vas faire quoi?
Ça lui était déjà arrivé d'être foudrage, de s'emporter et de sortir des horreurs. Mais c'était la première fois qu'il frappait quelqu'un. Ça montre à quel point il était incontrôlable. Il n'avait peur de rien, pour ainsi dire. Après ça, Chance a eu peur que la police arrive et il s'est enfui. Je crois qu'en tant que mère, c'était plus facile pour Nita de se dire que ce n'était qu'une phase. Elle ne voulait pas voir qu'il devenait vraiment dangereux. Elle se disait que c'était en grande partie de sa faute s'il agissait comme ça. Mais elle croyait aussi que si elle l'encourageait assez, il se reprendrait. C'est le terme qu'elle utilisait. Il se reprendrait. Mais si on est ici aujourd'hui, c'est que la situation ne s'est pas arrangée. Chance n'avait pas hésité à frapper quelqu'un comme le petit ami de Nita. Il n'avait peur de personne. On savait qu'il se comportait mal, mais ça devenait grave. Malheureusement, on ne l'a compris que trop tard. Quand Chance s'est enfui, on a essayé de localiser son téléphone. On a appelé tous les amis qu'on lui connaissait. Et on a fini par apprendre que Chance était chez l'un d'entre eux. Je l'ai fait monter dans la voiture. Il ne disait rien, mais il regardait droit devant lui, les bras croisés. On voyait qu'il n'était pas content. On s'est arrêté dans une station essence pour faire le plein et acheter des snacks. Le petit ami de Nita a appelé. Allô?
Oui, on l'a retrouvé.
Quand il a réalisé à qui elle parlait, Chance a vu rouge.
Tu m'entends? Je vais te défoncer la Je vais te tuer!
Il lui a dit qu'il allait lui coller un deuxième œil au beurre noir. En gros, il a menacé le petit ami de Nita par téléphone interposé. Il était hors de lui, très agressif envers Nita. Il hurlait.
Tu m'entends? Tu m'entends? Je vais te défoncer la Si je te trouve, je te tue!
Nita pleurait. Elle lui demandait pourquoi il faisait ça, lui disait qu'elle était inquiète pour lui. Mais Chance était furieux, il lui hurlait dessus. Il était agressif, il lui criait « Mais tu peux pas me laisser vivre ma vie !»
Y a pas pire mère que toi!
Il lui hurlait à 2 centimètres du visage. Il avait quasiment le front collé au sien et il hurlait à plein poumon. Il l'a poussé et j'ai fini par l'attraper et le tirer en arrière. Franchement, ça m'a choquée. Je n'arrivais pas à croire qu'il réagisse comme ça. Je me souviens lui avoir dit qu'il ne pouvait pas manquer de respect à sa mère comme ça, que c'était inacceptable, qu'elle faisait du mieux qu'elle pouvait.
Tout ce qu'elle a fait, elle l'a fait pour toi.
Nita pleurait et c'est là qu'elle m'a dit que Chance ne voulait plus rien avoir à faire avec elle. Il n'en avait rien à faire d'elle, de son bonheur, de ce qu'elle ressentait. Je crois qu'il a eu l'impression d'avoir gagné. C'est la première fois où je l'ai vu s'en prendre physiquement à sa mère. J'ai compris que le problème était plus profond, mais je n'ai pas voulu trop insister. Avec le recul, je regrette de ne pas l'avoir fait. Chance ne voulait pas retourner chez le petit ami de Nita et elle n'allait pas abandonner son fils. Je les ai donc conduits jusqu'à un hôtel et je leur ai payé une chambre. Elle a fait ce qu'elle faisait toujours. Elle m'a embrassée sur le front. Et m'a dit « Je t'aime, je t'appelle demain ». Et je suis partie. Je me souviens que je l'ai vue quand je m'en allais. J'ai regardé dans mon rétroviseur et elle s'est retournée. Elle m'a regardée. Nos regards se sont presque croisés dans le rétroviseur. Ça me fait beaucoup de peine de repenser à ce moment. Parce que c'est la dernière fois où je l'ai vue. Je l'ai laissé avec elle. Et je savais que ça n'allait pas. Je savais qu'il devenait de pire en pire. Je savais qu'il était dangereux. Je le savais. Et je dois vivre avec ça. Je l'ai laissé là-bas. J'aurais pu tout changer. J'aurais pu changer le cours des choses ce soir-là. Et je ne l'ai pas fait. Ce n'est pas ma faute s'il a fait ça. Mais je me demanderai toujours ce qui se serait passé si j'avais pris une autre décision. Si j'avais pris Chance avec moi. Ou je ne sais pas. Si j'avais fait quoi que ce soit différemment, est-ce que j'aurais pu éviter ça? C'est la dernière photo qui a été prise d'eux. Même si leur relation était difficile, on voit clairement qu'elle l'aime toujours autant. Regardez l'expression de son visage. Mais lui, en revanche, on voit qu'il sourit, mais c'est un sourire un peu fou. Quand on sait que c'est une des dernières photos qu'on a d'eux ensemble, et surtout qu'on sait ce qui s'est passé ensuite, franchement, c'est dur. Elle voulait avoir ce bébé. Elle était vraiment heureuse à l'idée d'avoir ce bébé. Mais elle savait aussi que Chance était très possessif à son égard. Et elle avait conscience que ça pouvait compliquer les choses. Elle m'a dit qu'elle lui avait annoncé la nouvelle et qu'il n'était pas content. Ils se sont disputés violemment suite à ça.
T'es une mère horrible!
Il lui a dit qu'il ne voulait pas d'autres frères et sœurs et qu'il... Je crois que ses mots exacts étaient qu'il allait éclater la tronche à ce bébé. Il l'a menacé de les tuer, elle et le bébé. Il avait donc de mauvaises intentions envers cet enfant à naître. Il voulait lui faire du mal. Je ne l'avais jamais entendu dire des choses aussi horribles jusque-là. Nita a ouvertement dit qu'elle avait peur de Chance et qu'elle craignait pour sa sécurité. Si seulement j'avais réalisé plus tôt, je ne me suis pas rendu compte à quel point ça s'était envenimé entre eux. Je n'avais pas compris que tout était sur le point de basculer. C'était un dimanche matin, j'ai entendu quelqu'un frapper à la porte. Il y avait 2 officiers de police sur le palier. L'un d'eux m'a dit « Je suis désolée, mais votre sœur a été assassinée. » Et je crois que je n'ai même pas réagi sur le coup. Je suis restée là à le fixer parce que les mots qui sortaient de sa bouche n'avaient aucun sens. J'ai senti mes jambes se dérober, mais je n'avais toujours pas vraiment compris. Il a commencé à me poser des questions. Il voulait savoir qui avait pu lui faire ça. Quand j'avais vu mon neveu pour la dernière fois, si j'avais eu des nouvelles de lui ces derniers jours. Et puis je me souviens qu'il m'a demandé si ça pouvait être son fils qui l'avait tué. Et c'est à ce moment-là que j'ai mis tout bout à bout, tout ce qui aurait dû nous alerter, nous inquiéter, son comportement violent, les menaces, la manipulation, son manque d'empathie. C'est à ce moment-là que j'ai compris. Qui était proche d'elle, qui était la seule personne à qui elle n'aurait jamais fait de mal. C'était lui. C'était Chance. Puis l'inspecteur m'a appelé. Il m'a dit « Bonjour Betty, on l'a trouvé. » Et il m'a demandé si j'étais assise. Et il m'a dit que Chance avait avoué le meurtre de ma sœur. J'ai dit « Oh non, d'accord. » Et il m'a demandé si je voulais savoir comment il s'y était pris. Et je lui ai dit que j'avais besoin de savoir. Il fallait que je sache ce qui s'était passé. Et il m'a expliqué qu'il allait falloir procéder à une autopsie, mais qu'il pensait qu'elle avait été poignardée à mort. Et j'ai dit, d'accord. Il m'a demandé si ça allait. Je me souviens que je lui ai dit que ça ne pourrait plus jamais aller. Je savais que ce soir-là, on n'avait pas seulement perdu Nita. Et on n'avait pas seulement perdu le bébé. On avait perdu Chance aussi. On a perdu 3 personnes ce soir-là. Ce sont 3 vies qui ont été perdues. Il n'y avait aucun soulagement, aucune consolation dans tout ça. Le meurtrier était appréhendé, oui, mais c'était mon neveu. Ce sont des affaires que j'ai trouvées chez Nita et que j'ai gardées. Nita était enceinte, mais elle n'avait pas beaucoup de moyens. Alors, elle achetait des petites choses ici et là, dans des vides-greniers ou autres, dès qu'elle pouvait se le permettre. Et j'ai trouvé ce carton dans ce qui devait être la chambre du bébé. Il contenait quelques jouets, des couvertures et une petite grenouillère. Ça a peut-être l'air de pas grand-chose. Mais c'était précieux à ses yeux. Donc bon, Clairement, elle se réjouissait à l'idée d'avoir un bébé et de recommencer tout ça. Alors j'ai tout gardé. Pour James, ce n'était qu'un obstacle de plus qui lui barrait la route. Quelque chose qui allait voler une partie de l'attention de sa mère, ce qu'il ne voulait pas. Je pense que quand il voyait tout ça, il devait être très jaloux et en colère. C'est donc... C'est le rapport d'autopsie. Je ne veux pas voir ça. Ce qu'il lui a fait, c'est 10 fois pire que tout ce qu'on peut imaginer. Au bout de 8 ans, on pense qu'on est prêt à affronter la réalité, mais je ne l'étais pas. Je pense que je ne le serai jamais. Ce dessin me bouleverse parce qu'il montre chacune de ses blessures, chacun des coups de couteau qu'elle a reçus. Nita a été poignardée à 57 reprises. Vous imaginez, comptez jusqu'à 57. Essayez de lever et de baisser votre main 57 fois. Ça veut dire que vous aviez 56 opportunités de vous arrêter. Qu'à 56 reprises, vous avez pris sciemment la décision de continuer. Encore et encore, sans vous arrêter, sans ressentir la moindre pitié. Il avait l'intention de lui infliger le plus de mal possible. C'est extrêmement difficile de s'imaginer ce qu'elle a vécu au cours de ses derniers instants de vie. La douleur qu'elle a dû ressentir, et je ne parle même pas de la douleur physique. Je pense à la douleur qu'elle a dû ressentir sur le plan émotionnel, de penser que c'était la personne qu'elle aimait le plus au monde qui lui faisait ça. Il n'y a pas un seul jour où je n'y pense pas. Et je crois que j'y penserai tous les jours jusqu'à la fin de ma vie. Ah oui, ça. C'est une vidéo qui a été enregistrée par la caméra de surveillance d'un magasin. Elle a été filmée probablement 20 ou 30 minutes avant qu'il ne la tue. C'est assez irréel quand on sait qu'elle vivait sa dernière heure. Je ne sais pas pourquoi, mais ça me contrarie énormément quand il fait cette espèce de pas de danse et qu'il tourne sur lui-même. C'est parce que je sais ce qui va se passer ensuite. Et là, il fait mine que tout va bien, mais je suis persuadée qu'il savait. Je ne pense pas qu'il se soit passé quoi que ce soit qui l'ait poussé à bout. À mon avis, ils ne se sont même pas disputés. Je suis persuadée que c'était une attaque méticuleusement planifiée. Je suis sûre qu'il savait ce qu'il allait faire. Il avait prévu de rentrer à la maison, passer à l'acte, prendre son argent, sa voiture, aller chercher ses amis et faire la fête. C'était ça son plan. Ils sont rentrés chez eux et elle a commencé à ranger les courses. Il est allé se changer, a attrapé son couteau dans le tiroir de sa commode, puisqu'il dit que c'est là qu'il le gardait. Il est entré dans la cuisine où elle se trouvait et il l'a attaquée par derrière. Je suis sûre et certaine qu'elle ne l'a pas du tout vu venir. Les placards du haut étaient ouverts dans la cuisine. Et une partie des courses se trouvait encore dans les sacs. Il a fait preuve d'une violence incroyable. Il aurait pu la tuer rapidement, mais il ne l'a pas fait. Et on a appris que ce n'était même pas ce qui l'avait tuée. Elle était encore vivante. Il a passé un fil autour de son cou et l'a étranglée jusqu'à ce qu'elle meure. On a donc cette femme étendue par terre. Son fils l'a poignardée à 57 reprises. Elle est de toute évidence en train de souffrir le martyre. Elle a peur, bien sûr. Elle n'a pas perdu connaissance, elle est toujours consciente. Et sa seule préoccupation, c'est de dire à la personne qui lui a fait ça que tout ira bien. Elle savait qu'elle allait mourir. Et elle l'aimait toujours tellement qu'elle a voulu le rassurer. Lui, avec son dernier souffle. C'est démoniaque. C'est vraiment diabolique de lui avoir fait ça. Il a gardé son calme, s'est changé et est allé faire la fête avec ses amis. C'est la vie qu'il voulait mener et il a tué sa mère pour ça. Jamais, mais vraiment jamais de chez jamais, je n'aurais imaginé que la personne à qui elle avait donné la vie lui ôterait la sienne. Surtout quand on sait à quel point elle l'aimait. J'avais toujours promis à Anita que je veillerais sur lui. J'en voulais tellement à Chance. J'éprouvais tellement de colère, tellement de peine. Mais je devais quand même veiller sur lui. Et je l'ai fait. Je me sentais obligée de le faire. Mais c'était plus par amour pour elle qu'autre chose. Parce que je lui avais fait cette promesse. Il a fallu attendre 4 ans et demi avant que le procès n'ait lieu. Pendant 4 ans et demi, j'ai continué à lui verser de l'argent sur son compte parce que c'était la seule façon dont je pouvais veiller sur lui, puisqu'il était en prison. Et puis, je me suis dit que j'allais enfin lui poser les questions qui fâchaient. Il fallait que je découvre la vérité. Je voulais savoir ce qui avait bien pu se passer. Je lui ai demandé pourquoi. Il ne m'a pas donné de véritable réponse. Et je lui ai demandé pourquoi il ne s'était pas arrêté après l'avoir poignardée 57 fois quand il a vu qu'elle était encore en vie. Il m'a répondu « parce que cette connasse ne voulait pas mourir. Il voulait qu'elle meure. » Cette enflure. Je l'entends encore me répondre ça. J'entends sa voix en train de prononcer ces mots. Et ça m'a mis la rage à ce moment-là. Et je savais que je ne pourrais pas m'arrêter tant que justice ne serait pas faite pour elle. Chance ne fera plus jamais partie de ma vie. Il ne pourra jamais rien me dire qui pourra apaiser la douleur qu'il a causée. J'ai perdu mon neveu dès l'instant où il a planté ce couteau dans Nita. C'est bizarre, parce que je l'aime encore. Je ne nierai jamais que je l'aime encore, mais c'est un amour lointain. La dernière fois que je lui ai parlé au téléphone, les derniers mots que je lui ai dits ont été « Chance, je veux que tu saches que je t'aime. Je t'aimerai toujours. Tu m'as fait énormément de peine, mais je t'aime. » J'avais besoin qu'il sache que je l'aimais. Et après, je n'ai plus répondu à ses appels. Ce qui m'inquiète, c'est la possibilité bien réelle que Chance finisse par sortir de prison et essaie de s'en prendre à moi. Et je crois que ma plus grande peur, ce n'est pas qu'il s'attaque directement à moi, mais qu'il fasse du mal à quelqu'un que j'aime. Chance est dangereux. Mais je sais qu'il ne me tuera pas. Il choisira la façon la plus sûre de me faire souffrir. Parce qu'il m'en veut. Il pense que c'est ma faute s'il est en prison. Ce ne sera jamais fini. Il va falloir que je vive avec cette peur toute ma vie. Il va falloir que je continue à me battre pour qu'il reste en prison, pour la sécurité de ma famille. Il y a clairement un avant et un après le meurtre de Nita au niveau de ma vie personnelle. Avant, je travaillais dans le privé pour une grande entreprise pétrogazière. J'allais tous les jours au bureau, de 9 à 5, et je retrouvais ma famille ensuite. Quand tout ça est arrivé, Nita venait de monter une association à but non lucratif. Elle voulait aider les victimes de la traite des êtres humains. C'était son objectif, c'était son rêve. Je savais que je ne pouvais pas laisser ce projet mourir avec elle. Elle voulait changer le monde, elle avait un rêve et c'était à nous de reprendre le flambeau. J'ai fini par quitter mon travail. J'ai refait des études et j'ai ouvert ma propre agence de détective privé. J'ai réussi à retrouver 48 enfants disparus et exploités et à les réunir avec leurs familles. Et je vois Nita dans chacun d'entre eux. Je la vois quand ils essaient de se reconstruire. Je la vois aussi quand je me rends compte que ces enfants sont brisés. Mais ils finissent par se remettre tout doucement et je vois son sourire à travers eux. Elle est peut-être partie, mais elle continue à vivre à travers nous. Il a simplement cru qu'il l'avait tuée, mais elle laissera une empreinte encore plus forte sur le monde.
The night doesn't announce itself as important. It never does. In California, in 1994, it arrives quietly, slipping over rooftops and palm-lined streets like it has 1,000 times before, carrying nothing more than warm air and the low hum of distant traffic. Inside a modest residential block, televisions glow behind curtains, dishes sit drying in sinks, and somewhere a clock ticks toward a moment no one can yet name. This is how cold cases are born, not with drama, not with warning, but with silence breaking just a second too late. The call reaches dispatch shortly after midnight. The voice on the line is unsteady, words tumbling out of order, breath hitching between sentences. There's been an incident. A person isn't responding. The address is repeated twice, then once more for clarity, as if saying it enough times might change what waits there. Patrol cars roll out, tires whispering against asphalt, radios crackling with clipped confirmations. No sirens. Not yet. The street is narrow, familiar, the kind officers have driven down hundreds of times without remembering. Tonight, they will remember it forever. The front door is ajar when they arrive. That detail sticks later, replayed in reports and testimony, because doors are symbols. Open means invitation, open means trust, open means someone thought they were safe. Inside, the house feels wrong immediately. Too still. Too quiet. The smell hits next, metallic and sharp, mixing with something domestic, something meant to clean. A light is on in the living room, casting a weak yellow halo over furniture pushed out of place. And there on the floor lies the reason for the call. A body where a body should never be. The victim is motionless, eyes open, fixed on nothing. There are signs of struggle but no clear story, no neat sequence of cause and effect. Violence happened here, sudden and decisive, but not loud enough to wake the neighbors, or at least not loud enough for them to admit hearing it. Officers move carefully, training taking over, voices low, movements precise. They secure the scene, call for backup, for detectives, for the people whose job it is to turn chaos into narrative. Outside, the first curious faces appear, peeking through windows, stepping onto porches, sensing that something has cracked the routine of their lives. By dawn, the street is sealed off with yellow tape that flutters slightly in the morning breeze. News vans arrive, satellite dishes unfolding like mechanical flowers. The word murder begins to circulate, spoken softly at first, then louder as confirmation comes. Reporters rehearse stand-ups, framing the house behind them, lowering their voices to match the gravity of the moment. This is no longer just a death. It's a story. And stories demand answers. Detectives walk the scene slowly, methodically, eyes trained to see meaning in disorder. They photograph everything. The overturned chair. The scuffed floor. The lamp still plugged in, light bulb warm to the touch. Nothing is obviously staged. Nothing screams motive. This isn't a burglary gone wrong. Valuables remain untouched. This isn't clearly personal either, no threatening notes, no history that leaps off the page. The victim led a quiet life. Predictable. Work home, weekends spent with friends or family. No enemies anyone can name. That fact, more than any other, unsettles the investigators. Random violence is the hardest kind to solve. Evidence collection begins, a slow ritual of gloved hands and sealed bags. Fibers are lifted. Fingerprints dusted. Biological traces gathered with care, swabbed and stored like fragile promises. In 1994, DNA is still a developing language. It can whisper possibilities, hint at identities, but it cannot yet shout a name with certainty. Still, the technicians treat every sample as if one day it might speak louder. They don't know when that day will come. They only know that this is their one chance to preserve the truth before time erodes it. The victim's identity is confirmed quickly, and with it comes the human weight of the case. Family members are notified in a small sterile room at the station, words chosen carefully but landing with brutal force. Shock gives way to disbelief, then to a grief so raw it feels physical. Friends gather, clutching each other, replaying their last conversations, searching for missed signs. They were fine, someone insists. Nothing was wrong. The absence of warning becomes its own wound, an endless source of questions with nowhere to go. As the investigation ramps up, the community reacts the only way it knows how, by trying to make sense of the senseless. Neighbors talk to reporters, voices trembling. This is a good area, they say. We look out for each other. Lawn signs appear overnight, candles, flowers, messages of love and outrage. Parents walk their children to school instead of letting them go alone. Doors are locked earlier. Trust retracts, quietly but decisively. A single act of violence has redrawn the emotional map of the neighborhood. Detectives fan out, knocking on doors, conducting interviews that stretch late into the night. Did anyone see anything? Did anyone hear anything unusual? A car? Footsteps? A voice raised in anger? Most answers are variations of no. Some mention a noise but dismiss it as normal. Some recall a stranger but can't describe them clearly. Memory proves slippery, especially when fear is involved. Leads are logged, prioritized, chased down. A co-worker with a short temper. An acquaintance who recently argued with the victim. A former romantic partner whose name surfaces briefly before sinking under alibis and timelines. Inside the precinct, a task force forms, fueled by urgency and pressure. Every homicide carries weight, but this one carries expectation. The victim fits a narrative the public understands, ordinary, innocent, undeserving. The media coverage intensifies. Headlines speculate. Talk radio fills with theories. Random attack? Unknown predator? Each possibility heightens anxiety, each unanswered question erodes confidence. The detectives feel it too. The sense that time is already slipping away, that every hour without an arrest makes the case harder. The evidence is processed as quickly as resources allow. Fingerprints come back negative or inconclusive. Fibers don't match anything in the database. The DNA profile extracted from the scene is partial, frustratingly incomplete, not enough to run against existing systems with confidence. It confirms what they already suspect, that someone else was here, but refuses to say who. The sample is preserved, documented, placed into an evidence locker with hundreds of others, each one a silent testimony to effort and limitation. Weeks pass. The initial surge of tips slows to a trickle. Investigators revisit early assumptions, re-interview witnesses, retrace steps. They walk the route from the victim's workplace to their home, noting blind spots, places where someone could watch unseen. They consider the possibility of coincidence, of wrong place, wrong time. None of it solidifies into a lead strong enough to hold. The case begins to cool, not because anyone wants it to, but because it resists heat. The family waits, suspended in a limbo that has no timetable. Detectives update them when they can, careful not to promise what they can't deliver. "We're still working" becomes a refrain, sincere but increasingly hollow. The family nods, thanks them, goes home to empty rooms and unanswered questions. They mark time in anniversaries, in newspaper clippings, in the slow fade of public attention. Each passing day without resolution feels like a quiet betrayal. Inside the department, the case is eventually reassigned. Files are organized, summaries written, the story of the investigation compressed into binders and boxes. The phrase "cold case" is not spoken out loud at first, as if saying it might make it real. But eventually, it appears in internal memos, a classification that acknowledges reality. No active leads. No suspects. Just evidence waiting for a future that doesn't yet exist. Years roll on. Technology advances. DNA databases expand. Other cold cases across the country are reopened and solved, names pulled from the past by new methods. Every so often, someone glances at the 1994 file and wonders, could it be tested again? Would it matter? Budget constraints, lab backlogs, and competing priorities always push it down the list. The evidence locker remains closed. The sample waits. The neighborhood changes. Houses are renovated. Families move in and out. Children who once held candles at vigils grow up, leave, forget. The crime becomes a footnote, a local legend occasionally mentioned but rarely examined. Yet for the family, for the detectives who worked it, the case never truly fades. It sits in the back of the mind, unresolved, a question mark etched into memory. What no one knows, not the family, not the community, not even the officers who first walked that quiet house, is that the story isn't finished. That the small envelope resting on a metal shelf, labeled and catalogued and nearly forgotten, holds a truth patient enough to wait decades. That science will eventually catch up to violence. And that when it does, the past will come rushing forward, demanding to be heard, reopening wounds long thought scarred over, and forcing everyone involved to confront a single inescapable fact: cold does not mean dead. Time doesn't pass evenly after a murder. It stretches and compresses, bends around anniversaries and news cycles, slows to a crawl for the people left behind and races ahead for everyone else. In the months after 1994, the case settles into an uneasy rhythm inside the department, not active enough to dominate briefings, not cold enough to be forgotten. Detectives rotate in and out, each one bringing fresh eyes, each one leaving with the same dull frustration. The file grows thicker, heavier, a physical manifestation of effort without reward. They start at the beginning again, because that's what you do when the trail fades. The night of the murder is reconstructed minute by minute, a timeline sketched on whiteboards and legal pads. The victim's last confirmed sighting. The last phone call. The routine that night was supposed to be ordinary: dinner, television, sleep. Somewhere in that sequence, an intruder entered, or someone already known crossed a line. Investigators debate it endlessly. Was the door opened willingly? Was there a knock? Or was it unlocked, a simple oversight that turned fatal? Each possibility implies a different kind of offender, a different psychology, a different pool of suspects. They lean heavily on the idea of familiarity. Most violent crimes happen between people who know each other, statistics insist. So detectives scrutinize relationships, combing through address books, phone records, calendars. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives, anyone who might have reason to be angry, jealous, desperate. Interviews are conducted in neutral rooms under fluorescent lights, questions delivered calmly, answers weighed carefully. People are cooperative, mostly. They want to help. They want the nightmare to end. But cooperation doesn't equal clarity. Stories align, alibis hold, motives dissolve under examination. Then they pivot. Maybe this was a stranger. Maybe someone saw an opportunity and took it. That possibility is more frightening, and the detectives can feel the pressure spike when they discuss it. A random predator suggests danger beyond a single household. It suggests the community is vulnerable. Patrols are increased, profiles circulated internally. Officers are told to watch for suspicious behavior, but suspicion is a blunt instrument. It catches too much and nothing at all. The media feeds the uncertainty. Local news runs segments asking viewers if they recognize composite sketches that are little more than guesses. Talk shows speculate about serial offenders, about patterns that may or may not exist. The victim's face becomes familiar, then overexposed, then slowly replaced by the next tragedy. Each time a new homicide hits the airwaves, someone inevitably asks if it could be connected. Each time, detectives shake their heads. There is no evidence of that. Not yet. Inside the evidence locker, the biological sample sits untouched. It has been tested as far as the lab can take it. The profile is partial, a handful of markers that confirm the presence of another person but refuse to identify them. In the mid-90s, the national DNA databases are small, incomplete, skewed toward repeat offenders. The odds of a meaningful hit are slim. The detectives know this, but knowing doesn't make it easier to accept. They push the lab anyway, ask if there's anything else to be done. The answer is always the same, not with current technology. Years creep forward. The case slides further down the priority list, overtaken by fresh crimes with fresher evidence and louder demands. Detectives retire, transfer, get promoted. New names appear on the file, their handwriting different, their tone slightly removed. Each one reads the reports, studies the photos, feels the same jolt of disbelief that this could still be unsolved. Each one thinks, briefly, maybe I'll be the one to crack it. Then reality intrudes. The victim's family becomes familiar with the long wait. They learn to live with two versions of time, the world's, which keeps moving, and theirs, which remains anchored to a single date. They attend memorials, give interviews, keep the case alive as best they can. They write letters to the department, to the district attorney, asking about progress. The responses are polite, restrained. No new developments at this time. The phrase becomes a wound of its own. By the early 2000s, something shifts in law enforcement culture. Cold cases are no longer seen as dead ends, but as challenges waiting for the right tools. DNA technology improves rapidly, moving from novelty to cornerstone. High-profile successes make headlines, cases from the 70s and 80s solved with a swab and a database search. Hope flickers in places it hasn't lived in years. Inside the department, conversations begin. What old cases might be worth revisiting? What evidence is still viable? The 1994 case surfaces in these discussions, always hovering near the edge. It has biological evidence, preserved correctly, a crucial advantage. But labs are overwhelmed, budgets tight. Every retest costs money, time, manpower. Decisions have to be made. Priority goes to cases with the strongest likelihood of resolution, those with clearer profiles or known suspects. The 1994 sample is partial, frustratingly so. It gets pushed back again. Still, the file doesn't gather dust. Detectives periodically re-examine witness statements, looking for inconsistencies that might stand out with distance. They re-interview a few people, now older, more removed from the fear of the moment. Some memories sharpen with time, others blur completely. One neighbor admits they heard a noise that night but didn't think it mattered. Another recalls seeing a car parked awkwardly, but can't remember the color, the make, the driver. These fragments are logged, weighed, set aside. They are not enough. The suspect pool narrows and widens in cycles. A name will rise to prominence based on a coincidence, a move out of state shortly after the murder, a job change, a prior argument, only to collapse under scrutiny. Each false start drains energy, chips away at confidence. Detectives learn to guard their optimism, to temper hope with experience. They know how cruel it can be to believe too much. Outside the department, life goes on. The house where the murder occurred changes owners more than once. Renovations erase physical traces, repainting walls that once absorbed violence. New families move in, some unaware of the history, others aware but convinced it belongs to another era. The street looks peaceful again. Children ride bikes. Dogs bark at passing cars. From the outside, there is no sign of the unresolved truth buried beneath routine. Inside the victim's family, the passage of time is marked differently. Parents age visibly, grief carving lines into their faces. Siblings grow older, their own lives shaped subtly by loss, career choices, relationships, a persistent awareness that safety is fragile. They keep a box of clippings, letters, photos. They tell the story to people who join the family later, spouses and children who inherit the weight of a crime they never experienced firsthand. The question of who did this becomes part of family history, a chapter without an ending. As the 2010s approach, forensic science makes another leap. Databases expand dramatically. Techniques like familial DNA searching enter the conversation, controversial but powerful. They allow investigators to find not the suspect themselves, but their relatives, building genetic family trees that point toward name. Departments debate the ethics, the legality, the potential for error. Some embrace it cautiously. Others hesitate. The 1994 case is mentioned again, this time with more urgency. The evidence is still there. The science is better. The public appetite for cold case resolutions is strong. A decision is made quietly, without fanfare. The sample will be retested using modern methods. It's a calculated risk, one that could yield nothing and still cost resources. But the alternative, doing nothing, has grown harder to justify. When the envelope is retrieved from the evidence locker, it feels almost ceremonial. The technician notes its age, the faded ink on the label, the care with which it was originally sealed. Chain of custody is verified meticulously. No mistakes can be made now. The sample is sent to the lab, accompanied by paperwork that carries decades of expectation. The waiting begins again, but this time it feels different. There is a sense, subtle but undeniable, that the case is breathing. Detectives check in with the lab more often than they admit. They imagine outcomes but refuse to voice them. Experience has taught them how dangerous anticipation can be. The results come back in stages. First, confirmation that a fuller profile can be generated. That alone feels like progress. Then, the profile is uploaded to expanded databases. Days pass. Weeks. At first, there is nothing, the familiar emptiness threatening to return. Then a notification arrives, not a direct hit, but something close. A partial match indicating a familial relationship. It's the kind of result that demands patience and precision, not celebration. A small group of investigators is assigned to follow the lead. They work quietly, aware that premature exposure could derail everything. Using the genetic information, they begin constructing a family tree, tracing relatives, narrowing branches. It's painstaking work, blending science with old-fashioned detective skills. Public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, all become pieces of a puzzle decades in the making. Names surface. Some are ruled out quickly, too young, too old, never lived nearby. Others linger, hovering in the gray space of possibility. One name, in particular, refuses to disappear. The age fits. The location fits. The timeline aligns just enough to be troubling. This person lived within reach of the victim in 1994, moved in circles that brushed close without colliding. At the time, they were invisible to investigators. Now they stand out. The detectives feel the weight of it settle over them, a mix of excitement and dread. If they're right, this case could finally close. If they're wrong, years of hope could collapse in an instant. They know better than to rush. Every step must be justified, every assumption tested. The past has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. As surveillance begins, as files are pulled and cross-checked, one truth becomes clear: the cold case is no longer cold. It's warming, slowly, dangerously, like embers stirred after years of ash. And somewhere, a person who believed they had outrun their past moves through their days unaware that time, relentless and patient, has finally begun to catch up. Surveillance is a quiet discipline, built on patience and restraint, and the detectives assigned to the revived 1994 case understand that better than most. They know the danger now is not lack of leads, but too much momentum. After decades of waiting, it would be easy to rush, to let excitement blur judgment. They refuse. Instead, they watch. They document. They let the suspect's life unfold under a lens he doesn't know exists. The man at the center of their attention looks unremarkable on paper. Middle-aged now. Employed. Married. No history that screams violence. In photographs pulled from public records, he smiles stiffly, the kind of smile that reveals nothing. In 1994, he lived close enough to the victim to matter, worked a job that placed him in the neighborhood regularly, and moved away not long after the murder. At the time, that move meant nothing. People relocate every day. Now it glows faintly, not proof but suggestion. Detectives build a timeline around him, layering known facts over assumptions they're careful not to trust. Where was he the night of the murder? Who can confirm it? Old employment records are requested, handwritten logs dug out of storage. Some are missing. Others are incomplete. Time has eroded certainty, sanding down details until they're smooth and indistinct. That erosion works both ways. It protects the innocent and shields the guilty. They interview people who once knew him, approaching casually, asking about the past as if it's a curiosity rather than an accusation. Former co-workers remember him as quiet, reliable. A neighbor recalls he kept odd hours, but shrugs, unsure if that matters. An ex-partner describes a temper that flared under stress, then faded just as quickly. None of it is enough to justify an arrest. All of it is enough to keep digging. The DNA result looms in the background, powerful but incomplete without context. Familial matches are not convictions, they are invitations to investigate. The detectives are acutely aware of the responsibility that comes with that power. A mistake here wouldn't just derail the case, it would destroy lives. They double-check every assumption, consult legal advisors, make sure each step is defensible. The past may be catching up, but the law still moves at its own pace. As weeks pass, surveillance reveals patterns. The suspect's routine is predictable. He leaves for work at the same time each morning, returns in the early evening, spends weekends on household projects and errands. He appears devoted to his family, the kind of man neighbors greet without hesitation. Watching him feels surreal for the detectives who carry the memory of the crime scene in their minds. The contrast is jarring, ordinary life layered over extraordinary violence. They begin to wonder about the psychology of it. How someone could commit such an act and then return to normalcy, build decades of routine on top of bloodshed. Some detectives believe the ability to compartmentalize is common among offenders. Others think guilt leaks out eventually, through addiction, anger, recklessness. In this case, there are no obvious leaks. If the suspect has carried guilt, he's carried it quietly. The decision to approach him for a DNA sample is debated intensely. On one hand, a direct match would change everything. On the other, a misstep could tip him off, prompting flight or destruction of evidence. In the end, they choose a strategy designed to minimize alarm.
À knock at the door. Polite conversation.
A request framed as routine, part of a broader review of old cases. They know they're asking him to hand over the one thing that can betray him, but they also know refusal could speak just as loudly.
The knock commence un weekday morning.
The suspect answers wearing casual clothes, coffee mug in hand, eyes flicking briefly over the badges before settling into something like calm. The detectives introduce themselves, explain they're revisiting an old investigation, that they're collecting samples from individuals who lived or worked nearby at the time. His posture tightens almost imperceptibly. He asks a few questions, measured, reasonable. Then he agrees. The swab takes seconds. A gentle scrape inside the cheek. A small mundane act with enormous implications. As the detectives leave, they thank him for his cooperation, careful to give nothing away. He watches them go, face unreadable. In the car, neither detective speaks for a long moment. They both know that whatever happens next, the line has been crossed. There is no going back to speculation. Soon, there will be an answer. The lab receives the sample and processes it with meticulous care. This time, the comparison is direct. No family trees. No probabilities. Just numbers lining up or refusing to. The wait feels longer than any before, stretched taut by expectation. Detectives distract themselves with other work, but their thoughts circle back constantly. They imagine both outcomes, rehearsing reactions they hope they won't need. When the result arrives, it does so without ceremony, a digital notification among many others. The match is strong. Overwhelming. The DNA collected from the crime scene in 1994 and the DNA swab taken weeks ago belong to the same person. There is no ambiguity, no statistical hedging. The science is clear. The room goes quiet as the report is read, the weight of it settling heavily on everyone present. For a moment, no one speaks. Decades of effort, frustration, and waiting collapse into a single fact. This is the person who was there. This is the person who walked out and disappeared into ordinary life. One detective exhales slowly, a sound that is half relief, half grief. Another rubs their temples, already thinking about the next steps, the legal hurdles, the families who must be told. An arrest warrant is prepared with care, the affidavit detailing not just the DNA match but the surrounding context, proximity, opportunity, the absence of alibi. Prosecutors review it line by line, anticipating defenses, challenges, public scrutiny. Cold case arrests draw attention, and this one will be no different. The story will be irresistible, decades-old murder solved by modern science. The temptation to rush the announcement is resisted. First, they need to do this right. The arrest happens without spectacle. Officers arrive at the suspect's home in the early hours, when routines are most vulnerable. He answers the door groggy, confusion giving way to shock as he's informed of the charge. Murder. The word lands heavily, bending the air around it. He doesn't resist. He doesn't confess. He simply looks past the officers, as if searching for something he's lost. Inside the house, family members wake to raised voices, to the sudden intrusion of law enforcement into a life they believed was stable. As he's led away in handcuffs, neighbors gather at windows, phones held up to capture fragments of history. Whispers ripple through the street. Who is he? What did he do? How long has this been coming? The answers will unfold publicly soon enough, but in this moment, there is only shock. The same shock that once gripped another neighborhood, another morning, nearly 30 years ago. Back at the station, the interrogation room is prepared. The suspect sits alone for a while, hands cuffed to a metal ring, eyes fixed on the table. Detectives watch through the glass, debating approach. Confession or denial, either is possible. DNA evidence is powerful, but people react to it in unpredictable ways. Some collapse immediately. Others cling to silence or spin elaborate explanations. The detectives know they must be patient, measured, let the evidence do the work. When questioning begins, it is calm, almost gentle. They start with basics, confirming identity, background, the life he's built since the 90s. The suspect answers cautiously, his voice steady but strained. Then the conversation turns. The detectives mention the case. The year. The victim's name. They watch his face closely. There is a flicker, recognition or fear, impossible to say. They explain the DNA match, laying out the science in clear terms. They don't accuse. They inform. Silence stretches. The suspect stares at the table, jaw clenched. When he speaks again, it's to deny involvement, to suggest contamination, coincidence, anything that might fracture the certainty of the evidence. The detectives listen, unflinching. They've heard it all before. They reiterate the facts, calmly, relentlessly. The match is not partial. It is not familial. It is him. Hours pass. The interrogation ebbs and flows, pressure applied and released. The suspect's confidence erodes incrementally. He asks for a break. He asks for water. He asks questions he already knows the answers to. At one point, he whispers that it was a long time ago, as if time itself might absolve him. The detectives note the phrasing, the subtle shift from denial to distance. Outside the room, preparations are underway to notify the victim's family. This is the part that never gets easier. A phone call is made, then another. Voices on the other end crack as the news is delivered. There is disbelief, followed by tears, followed by questions that spill out faster than answers can be given. An arrest has been made. The case is moving forward. Justice, long delayed, is finally within reach. The media erupts within hours. Headlines spread rapidly, repeating the phrase that has haunted the investigation for decades: cold case solved. Images of the suspect circulate alongside photographs of the victim frozen in time. Commentators marvel at the power of DNA, at the persistence of detectives who refuse to let the past stay buried. The public reacts with fascination, relief, and unease. If this could happen here, if this could remain hidden for so long, what else is waiting to be uncovered? As night falls on the day of the arrest, detectives return to the file that started it all. They leaf through reports written by people long retired or gone, feeling a strange kinship across time. The case that once seemed immovable has shifted, revealing a truth that waited patiently for science to catch up. But even now, as the suspect sits in a cell and the family begins to process what closure might mean, the story is not over. A trial looms. Questions remain. And the echo of 1994 still reverberates, reminding everyone involved that justice, when it arrives this late, carries a complicated kind of weight. The arrest changes everything and nothing at the same time. On paper, the case is no longer a mystery. A name replaces a blank line.
À face replace en unknown silhouette.
The words cold case begin to loosen their grip. But inside the room where detectives sit with coffee gone cold and files spread wide, there is no celebration. Only a new kind of pressure, heavier in some ways than the years of not knowing. Solving a murder after decades is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the hardest part. The suspect is processed quietly, photographed, fingerprinted, led through hallways that echo with routine indifference. Other detainees glance up, curious, sensing that this man carries a different weight. His charge predates many of them. Some weren't even born when the crime occurred. Time collapses in this building. Past and present coexist under fluorescent lights. In the interrogation room, the questioning resumes, but its purpose has shifted. This is no longer about finding the truth. The truth, as far as the evidence is concerned, has already been found. Now it's about context, about motive, about locking the case so tightly that it cannot be undone. The suspects' denials continue, but they have lost their edge. They sound rehearsed, brittle, like a story told too many times to oneself. Detectives lean into silence, one of the most effective tools they have. Silence invites people to fill it. Sometimes with lies. Sometimes with truth. The suspect fidgets, eyes darting, hands flexing against the cuffs. He asks what will happen to his family. It's the first moment he speaks about anyone but himself. The detectives note it, gently redirecting. They don't offer comfort. They don't threaten. They let the evidence speak, again and again, until the room feels smaller, the walls inching closer. Outside, prosecutors are assembling their strategy. Cold case prosecutions are uniquely fragile. Memories fade. Witnesses disappear. Defense attorneys will argue contamination, chain of custody errors, the unreliability of decades-old evidence. Every detail from 1994 is scrutinized as if it happened yesterday. Reports are retyped. Old photographs are scanned at higher resolution. The original evidence handlers are tracked down, some retired, some frail, some living far from the jurisdiction they once served. Each is asked to remember procedures from another lifetime. The DNA evidence is the spine of the case, but prosecutors know it cannot stand alone. They need corroboration. Circumstantial evidence that once seemed thin now takes on new significance. The suspect's proximity to the crime. His sudden move shortly afterward. Statements made years later that don't quite align. Patterns that were invisible without a suspect now snap into focus. The story begins to cohere, not as a single explosive revelation, but as a slow, undeniable accumulation. The victim's family is brought in for a private briefing. They sit in a conference room, hands clasped, listening as detectives explain what they can and what they can't.
The DNA match.
The arrest. The next steps. Some family members cry openly. Others sit in stunned silence, faces rigid, as if emotion might shatter them. Relief and grief collide, producing something unfamiliar and difficult to name. They have waited so long for this moment that now, standing inside it, they don't know how to feel. They ask the question they've carried for decades: why? Why this person? Why that night? Why their loved one? Detectives answer honestly. They don't know everything yet. Motive is still unclear. The suspect has not confessed. The family nods, absorbing disappointment layered on top of expectation. Closure, they are learning, is not a single moment. It is a process, slow and uneven, with no guarantee of peace. As news of the arrest spreads, the community reacts in waves. Shock dominates at first. Then curiosity. Then fear. Neighbors who once waved to the suspect replay years of casual interactions, searching for signs they missed. He seemed normal, they say, voices trembling.
We never suspected a thing.
The phrase echoes across interviews, social media posts, whispered conversations. Normal becomes suspect. Ordinary becomes unsettling. The media descends with renewed intensity, framing the story as a triumph of science and perseverance. Headlines celebrate the DNA breakthrough, the dogged determination of cold case detectives. But beneath the applause, there is an undercurrent of unease. If someone can commit murder and live undetected for nearly 30 years, what does that say about the limits of justice? About the people we think we know? Defense attorneys enter the picture, their role as essential as it is unpopular. They review the evidence with clinical skepticism, probing for weaknesses. They file motions to suppress, to delay, to exclude. They argue that the DNA sample could have been contaminated, that storage conditions over decades compromised integrity, that memories of witnesses are unreliable after so much time. It is their job to raise doubt, and they do it well. Court hearings begin, procedural at first, then increasingly charged. The suspect appears in a suit that doesn't quite fit, hair neatly combed, expression carefully neutral. The victim's family sits behind the prosecution, eyes fixed on him, searching for recognition, remorse, anything that acknowledges the damage done. He avoids their gaze, staring instead at the judge or his attorney, as if the past might remain distant if he refuses to look at it. Detectives testify about the investigation, walking the court through decades of work compressed into hours. They explain why leads dried up, why the case went cold, why it took so long to return. Their voices are steady, but inside, they feel the weight of accountability. Every decision made in 1994 is being evaluated through a modern lens. Some procedures hold up. Others reveal how far forensic science has come. The court listens, the jury takes notes, the story unfolds again, this time under oath. The DNA expert takes the stand, explaining complex science in accessible terms. Probabilities. Markers. Statistical certainty. The numbers are overwhelming, intentionally so. This is not guesswork. This is not coincidence. The defense cross-examines aggressively, but the foundation holds. The science does not waver. For many in the courtroom, this is the moment the case truly crystallizes.
Stille, the absence of a confession leave a hollow space.
People want to hear the suspect say it, to own it, to explain it. Without that, questions linger. Was it planned or impulsive? Was the victim targeted or simply unlucky? The suspect remains silent on these points, his strategy guided by counsel. Silence becomes his final shield. As the trial progresses, the emotional toll mounts. Family members relive the worst moments of their lives in public. They hear descriptions of the crime scene, details they never wanted to know. They brace themselves each day before entering the courtroom, reminding themselves why they're there. Justice, even when pursued, is painful. The detectives, too, feel the strain. They revisit memories long buried, confront doubts they once suppressed. Could they have done more in the beginning? Could the case have been solved sooner? These questions have no clean answers. The past cannot be rewritten, only examined. Outside the courthouse, the story continues to evolve in the public imagination. Podcasts pick it up. Commentators debate the ethics of familial DNA searches. Viewers argue online about guilt and innocence, often with little regard for the people actually living the consequences. The case becomes content, consumed and analyzed, its human core sometimes lost in the noise. Then comes the verdict. The courtroom is silent as the jury files in, faces unreadable. The foreperson stands, voice steady, and reads the words that will echo far beyond this room. Guilty. The sound is soft, but the impact is seismic. The victim's family reacts in unison, tears, gasps, hands clutching one another. The suspect remains still, eyes forward, absorbing a future he can no longer avoid. Sentencing follows, measured and formal. The judge speaks of accountability, of the gravity of taking a life, of the years stolen from the victim and their family. The sentence reflects the severity of the crime, tempered by the realities of time past. There is no applause. No sense of victory. Only finality. As the courtroom empties, the family steps outside into daylight that feels different than it did before. The case that defined their lives for so long has reached an ending, but the absence remains. Justice has arrived, late and imperfect, carrying relief and sorrow in equal measure. For the detectives, the file is finally closed. The boxes are returned to storage, now labeled solved.
The evidence locker is quietté for it.
Yet the case lingers in their minds, a reminder of why persistence matters, why evidence must be preserved, why time is not an excuse to stop searching. The 1994 murder no longer lives in the shadows of uncertainty, but its echo remains, an enduring reminder that cold cases are never truly frozen, only waiting. Waiting for science. Waiting for patience. Waiting for the moment when the past, no matter how deeply buried, demands to be heard. The courthouse empties, but the story refuses to leave. Outside, cameras remain trained on the steps long after the verdict, waiting for reactions, for statements, for something that can be compressed into a headline.
Inside the famille est scarce, silence dominate.
Justice has spoken, yet the air feels heavy, unfinished. Decades of waiting cannot be resolved by a single word read aloud in a courtroom. Guilty does not bring back a life. It only rearranges the pain. In the days that follow, the victim's name reappears everywhere. Newspapers revisit the old photographs, grainy images pulled from archives, now sharpened and color-corrected. Television segments replay footage of the neighborhood as it looks today, overlaying it with descriptions of how it looked in 1994.
Then and now collé on screen.
The implication is clear: time moved on, but the crime never did. For the family, attention is a double-edged blade. On one hand, there is validation. The world finally acknowledges what they have always known, that this life mattered, that the loss was not forgotten. On the other hand, every interview reopens wounds. Every question about how they feel forces them to translate grief into language, something it resists stubbornly. Some family members decline to speak. Others do, their voices steady but fragile, determined to say the victim's name out loud, again and again. The suspect is transferred to a correctional facility, processed into a system he has avoided for nearly 30 years. Intake officers note his age, his health, his demeanor. He is older than many of the inmates, his body carrying the quiet wear of a life lived in freedom. Prison is not designed for reflection, but reflection arrives anyway, uninvited, in the long hours between counts. The world he knew has narrowed to concrete walls and scheduled movement. The past he thought he escaped has finally caught up. Investigators return to their desks, but closure does not mean rest. Cold case resolutions trigger audits, reviews, internal discussions. Departments ask what lessons can be learned. Evidence retention policies are examined. Old cases are reopened, not because they suddenly have answers, but because this one proved that answers can emerge from places long ignored. The evidence locker becomes a symbol, not of failure, but of potential. Boxes are pulled. Seals are checked. Old envelopes containing hair fibers, cigarette butts, clothing scraps are held up to the light with new eyes. Technology has changed the rules. What once required a confession or an eyewitness now requires patience and a willingness to revisit the forgotten. Detectives who worked this case become reluctant ambassadors for perseverance, invited to conferences, interviewed by journals, asked to explain how they never let go. The truth is simpler and more complicated at once. They did let go at times. The case slept. But it was never destroyed. The community continues to process. Neighborhood meetings are held, less about safety now, more about trust. Residents talk about how well they knew the suspect, how many ordinary moments they shared with him.
Barbecue.
Small talk.
Borrowed tools.
The realization settles uncomfortably: monsters do not announce themselves. Evil does not always look the way stories suggest it should. This understanding lingers, altering how people see one another, subtly but permanently. Schools nearby incorporate the case into discussions about forensic science, about justice delayed, about the responsibilities of citizenship. Teachers tread carefully, aware that some students are connected to the families involved. Still, the story has become part of local history, a cautionary tale and a testament to endurance. Young people learn that the past is not dead, that actions ripple forward in ways no one can fully predict. For the detectives most closely involved, sleep comes unevenly. They replay interviews, court testimony, moments when the suspect almost spoke but didn't. They wonder what words were swallowed, what truths remain unspoken. Confessions, when they come late, are often partial, self-serving, shaped by regret or the desire to control the narrative. Without one, imagination fills the gaps, sometimes more cruelly than reality ever could. The victim's belongings, once held as evidence, are returned to the family. A watch, a jacket, small, intimate objects that carry disproportionate emotional weight. Hands tremble as they are unwrapped, memories flooding back with sudden intensity. These items were frozen in time, preserved by necessity. Now they re-enter a world that has moved on without the person who owned them. The family must decide what to keep, what to store away, what to let go. Each choice feels monumental. Anniversaries take on new meaning. The date of the crime, once marked by unanswered questions, is now marked by confirmed loss. Some family members visit the grave. Others avoid it, choosing instead to remember the victim as they were before the violence, alive in memory rather than defined by death. Grief, like justice, has no single correct form. The media cycle eventually shifts, as it always does. New stories emerge, new crimes demand attention. The cold case that once dominated headlines becomes a reference point, cited in discussions about DNA databases and investigative breakthroughs. Its details blur in the public mind, reduced to a few key facts. But for those directly involved, nothing has blurred. Everything remains vivid, etched deeply by years of waiting. Legal scholars debate the implications of the case. The ethics of using familial DNA are dissected in articles and panels. Supporters argue it brings justice where none seemed possible. Critics warn of privacy erosion, of slippery slopes. The case becomes a symbol in a broader argument, its human cost sometimes abstracted into policy language. The family watches from a distance, conflicted. They want others to find answers too. They also understand the unease. The convicted man files appeals, as expected. His attorneys argue procedural errors, challenge evidentiary rulings, question jury instructions. The process grinds forward, slow and methodical. For the family, this phase is exhausting. Each appeal feels like a reopening, a reminder that even after a verdict, nothing is ever fully settled. They learn the language of the legal system, acronyms and statutes becoming part of their daily vocabulary. Some appeals are denied swiftly. Others take months.
The waiting returns, familiar and unwelcome.
Yet it is different now. The central question, who did it, has been answered. What remains is endurance, the ability to live with an answer that arrived too late to prevent the loss it explains. Detectives occasionally receive letters. Some from strangers thanking them for their work. Others from people with information about unrelated cases, inspired to speak up by what they've seen. A few letters are darker, accusing the system of cruelty, of resurrecting old pain. The detectives read them all. They know that every solved case casts a long shadow. At home, away from badges and files, these investigators carry the residue of the work.
Spouse notice the qui est moment, the distant star.
Children ask simple questions about good guys and bad guys, about whether the world is safe. Answers are chosen carefully. The case has reinforced what they already knew: safety is relative, justice is imperfect, and persistence is often the only weapon available. The victim's story begins to change shape in memory. No longer only the person who was killed, they are remembered again for who they were in life. Friends share stories at small gatherings, laughter mixing with tears. Photos are passed around, some never seen before by younger relatives. In these moments, the crime recedes slightly, allowing the human being at its center to emerge more clearly. Yet the question of why still hangs in the air, unanswered. Motive remains speculative. Anger? Opportunity? Something darker and more complex? Without the suspect's voice, the truth remains fragmented. The family comes to understand that some questions will never be resolved, no matter how much evidence exists. This acceptance is not peace, but it is survivable. The solved cold case becomes part of institutional memory, referenced when budgets are discussed, when funding for forensic labs is debated. It is used to justify investments, to argue that time and technology can work together. In this way, the victim's death contributes to the possibility of future justice for others. It is a strange legacy, born of tragedy. Years later, new detectives will hear about the case during training, told as a lesson rather than a headline. They will learn how patience mattered, how evidence preservation proved critical, how one overlooked sample changed everything. They will not feel the weight of the decades the same way, but they will understand the principle: never assume a case is beyond reach. And in the quiet moments, when the noise of courtrooms and cameras has faded, the truth settles into its final form. A life was taken. Time passed. Science caught up. Justice arrived, altered by delay but not erased by it. The cold case is no longer cold, but the chill it left behind remains, a reminder etched into memory, into community, into the long, uneasy relationship between the past and the present. Time does not stop after a conviction. It stretches, bends, and reshapes itself around the aftermath, forcing everyone involved to learn how to live inside a new reality. In the months following the verdict, the case settles into a quieter phase, one without flashing lights or breaking news banners, yet no less heavy. This is the stage where consequences fully surface, where the emotional cost becomes clearer than any forensic diagram ever could. The prison routine closes in on the convicted man with mechanical precision. Doors open and shut on schedule. Lights dim and brighten at fixed hours.
The noise is constant. Voices echoing down corridor, metal clanging against metal, the low hum of institutional life.
At night, when the noise thins but never fully disappears, memory becomes loud. There is no courtroom now, no attorneys speaking on his behalf.
Only the past, replaying without interruption.
Decades ago, one moment set everything in motion. He lived as though that moment were buried. Now it sits beside him, unavoidable. He studies the world through narrow windows, noting how little it resembles the one he left behind. Technology advanced. Culture shifted. People grew older without him noticing. The shock of being caught late is different from being caught young. There is no illusion of a second life waiting on the other side. Only an ending, measured not in years lived freely, but in years remaining behind bars. Across the state, the family adjusts to a quieter grief. For years, uncertainty shaped every emotion. Hope and despair coexisted uneasily, flaring up whenever a rumor surfaced or a tip came in. Now uncertainty has been replaced by something more solid, heavier in its own way.
Certainty leave no room for fantasy.
There is no possibility that the wrong person suffered, no chance that the truth might suddenly soften. What happened is fixed. Some family members throw themselves into advocacy. They attend events focused on victims' rights, speak about the importance of evidence preservation, about never giving up on unsolved cases. They tell their story to rooms filled with strangers, their voices steady but eyes betraying the cost. Each retelling is both a burden and a release. The story belongs to them, but it also no longer belongs only to them. Others choose privacy, retreating from the public narrative. They return to routines interrupted long ago: work, family dinners, quiet weekends. Yet even in normalcy, the case intrudes. A sound, a smell, an offhand remark can pull them back instantly. Trauma does not obey verdicts. It lingers, reshaping itself over time rather than disappearing. The investigators, now removed from the daily pressure of trial preparation, find themselves reflecting more deeply. They revisit old notes, not out of necessity, but compulsion. They think about the early days of the investigation, the decisions made under pressure, the leads that went nowhere. In hindsight, everything feels obvious, though they know it wasn't. Hindsight is a cruel editor, trimming away uncertainty to create a false sense of inevitability. Internal reviews quietly acknowledge mistakes. Evidence that should have been prioritized wasn't. Assumptions hardened too quickly. Resources ran out. No one voice is blamed, the failure is collective, systemic. These conversations are uncomfortable but necessary. They form the unglamorous backbone of institutional growth, ensuring that future cases may benefit from hard-earned lessons. The evidence locker, once an afterthought, becomes a place of renewed respect. Officers handle old items with a reverence bordering on superstition. They understand now that what seems insignificant today may be decisive tomorrow. Dusty shelves are no longer symbols of neglect, but of patience, waiting for the right moment, the right tool, the right question. Meanwhile, the community's relationship with the case evolves. Initial shock fades into reflection. People talk less about the crime itself and more about the years in between. How did everyone live alongside unanswered violence for so long? How many other stories like this exist, unresolved, waiting quietly in files and memories? The case becomes a mirror, forcing the community to examine its own resilience and blind spots. Local journalists revisit their old reporting. Some cringe at youthful certainty expressed in early articles, at unnamed sources treated as fact. Others feel pride that they kept the story alive when it was no longer fashionable. Journalism, like policing, operates under pressure and limitation. The case reminds them that accuracy matters not just in the moment, but decades later, when words are re-examined through the lens of truth. Court transcripts are archived, becoming part of the official record. Future researchers will read them without the emotional immediacy of the trial, analyzing language, strategy, precedent. For them, the case will be an object of study. For those who lived it, it remains an open wound that has finally begun to scar over. The appeals process continues in the background, technical and dense. Legal arguments revolve around details invisible to the public eye, chain of custody nuances, jury instructions phrasing, admissibility standards. Each motion is another reminder that justice is not a moment but a process, often slow and exhausting. The family learns to compartmentalize, to let attorneys handle the legal battles while they focus on healing, however imperfect. At night, some family members dream of the victim not as they were found, but as they were remembered. Alive. Laughing. Ordinary moments play out in sleep, untainted by violence. Waking from these dreams is bittersweet. They offer comfort, but also reinforce absence. The mind, it seems, insists on preserving what reality took away. The convicted man's name gradually disappears from headlines, replaced by newer cases, newer tragedies. In prison, he becomes just another inmate, his notoriety fading as memories outside shift elsewhere. Inside, time is counted differently. Days blur. Seasons are marked only by temperature changes felt through concrete. The world he impacted so profoundly has moved on without him. Yet his actions continue to ripple outward. The case is cited in policy discussions about cold case funding, about DNA backlog reduction, about cross-agency cooperation. Grants are approved referencing it.
Training module mention it.
In these contexts, the story is distilled into bullet points and takeaways. It loses emotional texture but gains influence. For one retired detective, the case resurfaces unexpectedly during a family gathering. A grandchild asks what he did for work, innocent curiosity opening a door he thought he had closed. He hesitates, then tells a simplified version, careful not to frighten. Later alone, he realizes the case will follow him forever, woven into his identity whether he wants it or not. The victim's grave becomes a place of quieter visits. No longer a site of unanswered pleading, it is now a place of conversation. Family members speak aloud, updating the departed on what has happened, on how the truth finally came out. They talk about the trial, the verdict, the strange mix of relief and sadness. Whether or not anyone listens, the act itself brings a measure of calm. The phrase cold case solved remains powerful, but its meaning deepens with time. It does not signify an ending so much as a transformation. A mystery becomes a memory. A question becomes a fact. Pain becomes something that can be named, if not fully understood. As years pass, new cold cases will emerge, and some will be solved using technologies unimaginable in 1994. When they are, this case will be remembered as part of a broader shift, a moment when the past and future intersected sharply. It will be cited as proof that waiting is not the same as forgetting. And still, in the quiet spaces between official milestones, the human truth persists. A life was taken violently, its absence reshaping countless others. Justice arrived late, bearing both relief and regret. The world did not reset. It adjusted, carrying forward the weight of what happened and the knowledge that even buried truths have a way of rising, slow but relentless, into the light. Long after the courtroom emptied and the cameras moved on, the case continued to live in quieter places, in hallways where no microphones waited, in private conversations where voices dropped instinctively, as if the truth itself were still dangerous. This is where the story grew heavier, where resolution did not mean relief, and where the word solved began to feel incomplete. In the months that followed, investigators found themselves fielding calls from across the state, then across the country. Other departments wanted to know exactly how it happened. Not the headline version. The real version. The tedious version. The years of neglect. The moment someone finally asked the right question. They spoke about mislabeled envelopes, about outdated testing protocols, about a fingerprint smudged beyond recognition but preserved anyway. They admitted frustration. They admitted doubt. And in rare moments, they admitted fear that this case was not an exception, but a warning. The evidence locker, once a silent graveyard of unresolved violence, became a symbol. Officers who had walked past it for years now stopped, reading labels with new attention. Each box felt heavier. Each tag represented a possibility, a life paused mid-sentence. The locker was no longer just storage. It was a reminder that time does not erase truth, it only delays its arrival. Across the community, conversations shifted. At first, people spoke about the arrest in hushed excitement, replaying details like a shocking film twist. But as weeks passed, fascination gave way to discomfort. Neighbors realized they had lived alongside a man capable of extraordinary violence, and never noticed. They questioned their instincts, their assumptions. The invisible boundaries between normalcy and horror suddenly felt thin, unreliable. Local schools invited counselors to speak with students who had heard fragments of the story at home. Children asked questions adults struggled to answer. How could someone hide for so long? Why didn't the police know? Are we safe now? The answers were careful, incomplete. Safety, they explained, is never absolute. Justice, when delayed, leaves echoes. The victim's name appeared again and again in print, no longer followed by a question mark but by a period. For the family, seeing that punctuation change was unexpectedly painful. The question mark had been cruel, but it also held hope. The period felt final. It closed the sentence without restoring what was lost. One sibling, who had moved away decades earlier, returned to the city for the first time since the funeral. Streets felt smaller. Buildings older. Memory overlapped with reality in disorienting ways. They stood outside the old house, now repainted, occupied by strangers unaware of its history. The world had not paused for grief. It rarely does. At night, insomnia became common. Closure did not bring rest. It brought replay.
Conversation with détective.
Testimony echoes. The moment the verdict was read. Each memory looped, refusing to settle. Trauma, long dormant, stirred again, reshaped by confirmation. The mind struggled to reconcile the past imagined with the past proven. The convicted man, now fully absorbed into the prison system, began to understand the depth of his own erasure. Outside, his name triggered headlines.
Inside, it meant nothing.
He was assigned a number, a schedule, a narrow future. The notoriety that once surrounded his arrest dissolved quickly. Infamy has a short half-life behind bars. He wrote letters that were never sent. Drafts filled with justifications, confessions, half-truths. Some letters were addressed to the victim's family. Others to himself. None survived the shredder. Words felt insufficient, dangerous even. Silence became easier, though heavier. Psychologists evaluated him as part of routine intake, documenting patterns that now seemed obvious in retrospect. Compartmentalization. Narcissistic tendencies. A remarkable ability to present calm while carrying violence beneath the surface. Their reports were clinical, detached. They described a man, not the damage he left behind. Meanwhile, policy discussions gained momentum. State officials debated funding increases for cold case units. Advocates cited this investigation repeatedly, pointing to the decades-long delay as evidence of systemic failure. Committees formed. Budgets adjusted. Press releases promised change. Whether those promises would endure remained uncertain. The lead detective was invited to speak at a conference on forensic advancements. Standing at the podium, they felt exposed. The applause that followed each mention of the case felt undeserved. Success, in this context, felt like survival rather than victory. They emphasized patience, humility, and the danger of certainty. We didn't crack the case, they said. The evidence waited for us to catch up. In private moments, guilt surfaced. Not guilt for causing the delay, but for living with the knowledge that justice had arrived too late to matter in the ways that truly counted. The victim did not return. The years remained stolen. No technology could repair that. The media produced retrospective pieces, slickly edited, complete with ominous music and dramatic pauses. The family declined participation in most of them. Their story had already been told enough times by strangers. They wanted ownership back, even if only in silence. Still, the case found its way into public consciousness, resurfacing during anniversaries, during debates about criminal justice reform, during discussions about DNA databases. Each mention reopened something, faint but persistent. Healing, they learned, was not linear. It circled, revisited, evolved. One unexpected development came from an anonymous letter sent to the district attorney's office. The writer claimed to have suspected the man years earlier but dismissed the thought as paranoia. They described small details, a comment overheard, a reaction to a news story, that now felt sinister. The letter ended with an apology. It offered no new evidence, only regret. The office filed it quietly. Guilt, like truth, often arrives late. In the victim's neighborhood, a small memorial plaque was installed near the site connected to the case.
No ceremony. No speeches.
Just a marker acknowledging what happened. People stopped briefly when passing, reading the name, the date. Some nodded. Some lingered. Memory found a physical anchor. The phrase "never forget" appeared frequently in coverage, but forgetting was never the real danger. Misremembering was. Simplifying. Turning a complex human tragedy into a tidy narrative of justice delayed but delivered. Those closest to the case knew better. The story resisted neat endings. As years continued to move forward, new investigators entered the force who had been children when the crime occurred. To them, the case was history. A lesson. A warning. They studied it in training sessions, noting the breakthroughs, the failures. They absorbed it academically, without the weight of lived uncertainty. And yet, something about the case lingered even for them. Perhaps it was the reminder that every file, no matter how old, represented real people still waiting in some form. That waiting did not expire. The cold case label, once synonymous with abandonment, had been stripped away, but its shadow remained. It clung to conversations, to policies, to personal identities shaped by years of unanswered questions. Solved did not mean finished. It meant transformed. In the quietest moments, when no one was watching or asking, those touched by the case confronted a simple, uncomfortable truth. Justice had arrived, but it did not bring peace. It brought clarity. And clarity, while powerful, carries its own weight, a weight that does not fade, but settles, becoming part of the landscape of memory, heavy and permanent, shaping every step taken afterward. Years do not simply pass after a case like this. They accumulate. They layer themselves over the truth, softening some edges while sharpening others, until the story exists in multiple versions at once. The official record, the public memory, and the private reality carried by those who lived through it. This is where the case settles into its longest phase, not investigation or trial, but aftermath, where meaning is negotiated slowly and often painfully. The courthouse returns to its usual rhythm. Footsteps echo without urgency. Clerks file paperwork for unrelated disputes. The room where the verdict was read hosts new arguments, new conflicts, none of them aware of the history embedded in the walls. Justice, once delivered, rarely leaves a visible mark. It disappears into routine, leaving only those who remember to carry it forward. In the prosecutor's office, the case file remains on a shelf marked closed, but it is pulled down more often than most. New attorneys read it to understand strategy, to learn how a single piece of preserved evidence can outweigh decades of doubt. Some read it with admiration. Others read it with unease, recognizing how easily the outcome could have been different if that evidence had been lost, mislabeled, or destroyed. The lead prosecutor revisits their closing argument months later, replaying it mentally during sleepless nights. Certain phrases feel too polished now, too confident. At the time, certainty was required. Now, with distance, nuance creeps back in. They know the jury reached the correct verdict, but correctness does not erase complexity. It rarely does. The defense team, quietly dismantled after the trial, carries its own version of the story. Some believe the system worked exactly as intended. Others harbor lingering doubts, not about guilt, but about process. They debate whether justice delayed compromises justice itself, whether a fair trial is ever truly possible when memory has eroded and witnesses have aged beyond recognition. These debates happen in private offices, away from headlines, unresolved. The family marks the anniversary of the verdict without ceremony. No statements. No interviews. They gather instead in familiar spaces, sharing food, sharing silence. The conversation drifts between ordinary topics and moments of sudden heaviness. Someone laughs, then stops abruptly, guilt flickering across their face.
Joyce ti fil dangereux, haifit mait betre past.
One family member begins therapy for the first time since the crime. For years, they believed resolution would make help unnecessary. Instead, clarity opens new wounds. Therapy sessions peel back layers of coping mechanisms built during decades of uncertainty. The therapist listens as the story unfolds, not as a case, but as a life shaped by absence. Healing, they learn, is less about forgetting and more about integrating pain without letting it dominate. In the prison, the convicted man's world shrinks further. Initial assessments give way to routine classification. He is no longer news. He is a body in a system designed to manage time, not reflection. Yet reflection arrives anyway, uninvited. It surfaces in dreams, in flashes of memory triggered by sounds or smells. He confronts the realization that his story will be told without him, interpreted by others, frozen in records that do not allow rebuttal. Occasionally, he hears rumors through the prison grapevine, other inmates discussing cold cases, DNA evidence, long sentences delivered late. He listens but rarely speaks. His own experience has taught him that explanations do not change outcomes. Silence becomes a form of control, the last one available to him. Outside, academic interest in the case grows. Criminology students analyze it as a turning point, a demonstration of how forensic science reshaped investigative timelines. They chart the technological gap between 1994 and the present, highlighting how limitations once accepted as final obstacles were eventually rendered irrelevant. In classrooms, the case is clean, orderly, stripped of emotional debris. A professor assigns it as required reading, encouraging debate about ethics, resource allocation, and the moral responsibility of preserving evidence indefinitely. Students argue passionately, unaware that for some, these questions were not theoretical but lived. The gap between academic discourse and personal experience remains wide, difficult to bridge. Journalists occasionally reach out again, seeking reflections years later. Some family members decline politely. Others respond with brief statements, carefully worded. They emphasize gratitude for resolution while resisting narratives of triumph. There is no triumph here, only an ending that arrived long after it was needed. The memorial plaque becomes weathered, touched by sun and rain. Flowers appear on certain dates, then disappear. Passers-by pause, read, move on. The marker does its quiet work, embedding the story into the physical landscape without demanding attention. Memory becomes part of the environment, not an interruption. A retired investigator visits the site one afternoon, standing at a distance. They do not approach the plaque. They simply observe, absorbing the ordinariness of the surroundings. Cars pass. People walk dogs. Life continues. The contrast is unsettling but necessary. It confirms that while tragedy leaves scars, it does not halt the world. In departmental meetings, the case is cited as justification for new protocols. Evidence digitization accelerates. Cold case units receive modest but meaningful funding increases. Younger officers are trained to treat every piece of evidence as potentially timeless. These changes are incremental, unglamorous, but real. Progress, when it comes, rarely announces itself loudly. The lead detective, now closer to retirement than the beginning of their career, begins to mentor younger colleagues. They speak less about tactics and more about patience. About resisting the urge to close cases prematurely. About listening when evidence contradicts intuition. Their voice carries authority not because of success, but because of endurance. Privately, they wrestle with a question that never fully resolves: how many other cases did not receive the same second chance? How many boxes and how many lockers contain truths that will never surface because time ran out or funding dried up? The case serves as proof of possibility and a reminder of limitation. For the family, milestones take on new meanings. Weddings, birthdays, funerals. The absence is always present, woven into celebrations and sorrows alike. They speak the victim's name freely now, without fear of reopening wounds. The name no longer signals an unresolved mystery. It signals remembrance. At times, anger resurfaces unexpectedly, directed not at the convicted man, but at the years lost to silence. At a system that moved on too quickly. At a society that forgets easily. Anger becomes part of the healing process, acknowledged rather than suppressed. The phrase DNA breakthrough remains associated with the case, but those closest to it know the breakthrough was not just scientific. It was procedural. Cultural. A willingness to revisit what had been labeled finished. Science provided the tool, but human persistence provided the momentum. As the years stretch on, the case begins to fade from public consciousness. New stories replace it. New injustices demand attention. This fading feels both relieving and unsettling. Relief that the constant scrutiny ends. Unease that memory is fragile, dependent on repetition to survive. One evening, during a quiet dinner, a family member remarks that they finally feel tired in a normal way. Not the exhaustion of waiting, but the fatigue of living. The comment lands heavily, signaling a subtle shift. Life is no longer organized around a question mark. It is organized around forward motion, however tentative. The cold case designation, once a label of neglect, now exists only in archives. The story has moved beyond it, into a category harder to define. It is not simply a solved crime. It is a lesson, a warning, a testament to patience and its cost. In the end, the case does not conclude with closure, because closure implies sealing something away. Instead, it remains open in a different sense, open to interpretation, to memory, to influence. Its impact continues to ripple outward, shaping policies, perspectives, and personal lives in ways that cannot be fully measured. And so the story persists, not as a headline or a verdict, but as a quiet presence. A reminder that truth can survive neglect, that justice can arrive late and still matter, and that every answer once found carries with it new questions that echo long after the search has officially ended. With time, the story stops announcing itself. It no longer enters rooms with urgency or demands attention through headlines and alerts. Instead, it settles into the background of everyday life, present but quiet, influencing decisions without declaring its name. This is how unresolved history behaves even after it has been resolved on paper. It becomes atmosphere. In the city, the places connected to the case continue to exist without acknowledgement. A parking lot repainted. A storefront renovated. A stretch of sidewalk repaired.
Nos plaques marques et vraies locations touchent de bail violence.
Most people pass through unaware, carrying groceries, checking phones, thinking about dinner. The ordinariness is unsettling precisely because it is honest.
Tragédie rarely leave visible scar.
For the family, routines stabilize. Mornings begin without the reflexive check for news updates. Evenings end without the familiar ache of unanswered questions. This stability feels fragile at first, as if calm might be temporary, something that could be taken away. Slowly, trust builds. Not in the system, not in fate, but in the simple idea that life can continue without constant vigilance. Yet memory does not dissolve. It reorganizes. Certain dates still hold weight. Certain songs still trigger a tightening in the chest. The difference now is control. Grief no longer dictates the rhythm of every day. It waits, appearing when invited or when caught off guard, then receding again. One family member takes on the task of organizing old photographs. Boxes untouched for decades are opened carefully, their contents smelling faintly of dust and time. Photos reveal a person frozen mid-laugh, mid-motion, alive in a way that feels almost foreign now. These images do not belong to the case. They belong to a life that existed before it. That distinction matters. As the photos are sorted, a realization settles in. For years, memory had been dominated by the final chapter. Now earlier chapters are reclaiming space. The story is expanding backward, becoming fuller, more human. The victim is no longer defined solely by how they died, but by how they lived. In the justice system, the case becomes part of institutional memory. It is referenced during internal audits, during discussions about backlog prioritization. It influences policy in subtle ways. Not through dramatic reform, but through quiet adjustments. A budget line here. A training requirement there. Change accumulates slowly, almost invisibly. A new cold case unit is formed, staffed by younger detectives who grew up in a world shaped by forensic television shows and instant information. They approach old files with a mixture of confidence and caution. The solved case from 1994 serves as both inspiration and warning. Proof that patience can pay off. Evidence that failure to act can cost decades. One detective, early in their career, studies the case obsessively. They are drawn not to the breakthrough, but to the long silence that preceded it. They ask questions others once avoided. Why was the evidence overlooked? Why did momentum stall? Their supervisors encourage curiosity but temper expectations. Not every case has a waiting solution. Not every truth survives intact. The detective understands this intellectually, but emotionally, the case ignites something. A belief that persistence matters. That files are not finished simply because they are old. This belief shapes their approach to every investigation that follows. Meanwhile, the convicted man's existence becomes increasingly static. Prison time stretches differently, flattening days into sameness. The world outside changes without reference to him. He learns about technological advances through outdated magazines and second-hand conversations. He knows his name occasionally resurfaces in articles or academic discussions, but these mentions feel abstract, disconnected from his daily reality. He reflects on the moment he was arrested, replaying it endlessly. The shock. The disbelief. The rapid collapse of a life carefully compartmentalized. He wonders whether he would have confessed earlier if confronted with certainty sooner. The question has no answer. Hypotheticals offer no relief. Psychological evaluations continue periodically, documenting patterns of thought now well established. Reports note acceptance without remorse, resignation without insight. These observations are filed away, adding to a record that will outlive him. Outside, the broader public's relationship with cold cases evolves. Advances in genetic genealogy spark renewed interest in old crimes. Stories circulate of decades-old mysteries solved overnight. The narrative shifts from hopelessness to expectation. People begin to assume that time favors truth. Those closest to the 1994 case watch this shift with mixed feelings. Hope is powerful, but it can also oversimplify. Not every case will be solved. Not every family will receive answers. The danger lies in believing technology alone is enough, forgetting the human cost of waiting. At a community forum, a panel discusses the emotional toll of unresolved cases. A family member speaks quietly, without notes. They describe years of living in suspension, of planning life around uncertainty. They emphasize that resolution, while welcome, did not erase the past. It changed it. The audience listens, subdued. Some take notes. Others simply sit with the discomfort. After the forum, strangers approach to offer condolences, to share their own stories of loss. The family member listens politely, absorbing fragments of other lives marked by unanswered questions. There is comfort in shared understanding, even among strangers. The media, now focused on newer breakthroughs, occasionally references the case as a precursor. A turning point. An example. Each mention feels smaller than before, less intrusive. The family notices this with a strange sense of relief. Their story is no longer fresh. It is no longer content. On the anniversary of the crime, no official statements are released. No press conferences are held. The day passes quietly. This quiet feels earned. It represents a boundary finally respected. In private, the family gathers in the evening, sharing a meal. They speak about unrelated topics, about work, about plans. Eventually, the conversation turns to memory, naturally, without prompting. Stories are told, some familiar, some forgotten. Laughter surfaces, tentative but real. Grief and joy coexist without conflict. The next generation listens, absorbing these stories without the weight of lived uncertainty. For them, the case is history, something that happened before they were born. This generational shift marks a significant transition. Trauma, while still present, is no longer raw. It has been processed, reshaped, made survivable. In academic circles, the case continues to be dissected. Articles analyze the forensic methods, the legal strategies, the psychological profiles. These analyses are precise, detached. They extract lessons while stripping away emotion. This detachment is necessary, but incomplete. It captures what happened, not what it felt like. A former journalist who covered the case extensively reflects on their role years later. They reread old articles, noting language choices, the framing of uncertainty. They recognize the power they once wielded, shaping public perception during a time when facts were scarce. The realization brings humility. Words they understand now have long shadows. As the years accumulate, the case becomes less about resolution and more about legacy. Its influence spreads quietly, shaping how institutions treat old evidence, how investigators approach stalled leads, how families advocate for attention. The story becomes a reference point, not a fixation. Still, in moments of stillness, the core truth remains unchanged. A life was taken. Time passed. Justice arrived late. No amount of analysis alters that sequence. What does change is how that truth is carried. It becomes lighter, not because it weighs less, but because it is shared differently. It is no longer borne alone by those waiting for answers. It is distributed across systems, policies, memories. The cold case label, once heavy with neglect, now serves as a reminder of responsibility, of patience, of humility in the face of uncertainty. It reminds those who encounter it that silence does not mean absence, and that truth can persist quietly, waiting for the moment when someone finally listens. And so the story continues, not as an open wound, but as a scar, visible to those who know where to look. Proof of survival. Proof of loss. Proof that even after decades of silence, the past remains present, shaping the future in ways both subtle and profound, long after the final verdict has been read. Time does something strange in the final stretch of a story like this. It stops feeling like an enemy and starts behaving like a witness. Quiet. Patient. Always present. By now, the case no longer demands attention, yet it refuses to disappear. It lingers in subtle decisions, in institutional habits, in the way people speak about the past with more care than they once did. In the city, a new generation grows up without remembering the crime at all. They know the neighborhood by different landmarks, different stories. For them, the case exists only as a footnote, a reference in archives, a headline rediscovered through a search bar late at night. This distance is not disrespect. It is evidence of life continuing, reshaping itself around what once seemed immovable. For the family, this distance is complicated. On one hand, it brings relief. The burden of being constantly associated with tragedy loosens its grip. On the other, it introduces a quiet fear that the victim might fade too much, become abstract, reduced to a lesson rather than a person. To counter this, they keep telling stories among themselves, small details that never made it into reports. Favorite foods. Habits. The way the victim laughed at their own jokes. These memories are not for the public. They are for preservation. One family member begins writing privately, not a memoir, not a statement, just fragments. Scenes remembered out of order. Sensations rather than facts. The writing has no audience. It is an act of control, a way to shape memory rather than be shaped by it. In putting words down, they reclaim ownership of a story long told by others. The justice system, having moved on operationally, still carries the case in its institutional conscience. When discussions arise about evidence retention policies, someone inevitably references it. Not by name, but by implication. Remember what happened when we almost lost that sample. The reminder needs no elaboration. It has become shorthand for caution. Cold case investigators now operate in a climate shaped by expectation. Families expect answers. Communities expect effort. Advances in technology have shifted perception. What was once seen as impossible is now merely difficult. This shift brings hope, but also pressure. Detectives feel it in every unopened file. The solved case from 1994 stands as both proof and burden. One investigator admits privately that the case changed how they think about time. They no longer view unsolved years as lost, but as suspended. Waiting does not always mean failure, they believe. Sometimes it means preparation. This belief sustains them through long stretches of silence, through cases that offer nothing but frustration. The convicted man grows older in confinement, his physical presence diminishing as his symbolic presence stabilizes. He is no longer feared or discussed. He exists as a resolved variable in an equation long settled. His appeals exhaust themselves quietly. The legal system, thorough but finite, closes doors one by one. In moments of reflection, he confronts a truth he cannot escape. The world learned to live without knowing what he did, and then learned again after it found out. His role in that world is complete. There is nothing left to influence. This realization, more than imprisonment, defines his final years. Outside, anniversaries pass with less notice. Dates that once triggered anxiety now arrive gently, acknowledged and released. The family notices this change with cautious acceptance. Healing, they realize, does not announce itself. It reveals itself only in hindsight, through the absence of constant pain. At a small gathering, someone asks whether justice feels complete now. The question hangs in the air, heavy and imperfect. The answer, when it comes, is honest. Justice arrived, they say. Completion is something else entirely. It belongs to imagination, not reality. The conversation shifts naturally after that. Life insists on moving forward, regardless of philosophical discomfort. Plans are made. Trips discussed. Ordinary concerns reclaim space. This ordinariness, once impossible, now feels earned. The media's relationship with the case fades almost entirely. It appears occasionally in lists of notable cold case resolutions, stripped down to a paragraph. Year. Location. Method. Outcome. The compression feels strange but inevitable. Stories that once consumed thousands of words now occupy a few lines. This reduction is not erasure. It is transformation. In academic journals, the case remains alive, cited and cross-referenced. Its relevance persists because it intersects with multiple disciplines: law, forensics, psychology, ethics. Scholars debate its implications with precision, often without emotional language. This distance allows clarity, though it cannot capture the lived weight of waiting. A criminology student writes a thesis inspired by the case, focusing on the moral responsibility of institutions to revisit past failures. The student never meets the family, never visits the locations. Their understanding is filtered through data and analysis. Yet the impact is real. The case continues to educate, to shape thinking far beyond its origin. In quieter moments, the family reflects on what they would say to the victim now, knowing what they know. The imagined conversations are gentle, not dramatic. They would talk about how long it took, about the strange relief of certainty, about the years lived in between. Whether forgiveness enters these thoughts varies. There is no consensus, and none is required. The memorial plaque remains, now a familiar part of the landscape. For those who worked the case, retirement arrives eventually. Careers end. Offices are emptied. Files are passed on. The case becomes part of personal legacy, mentioned when summarizing decades of work. It stands out not because it was solved, but because it waited. Because it endured. One retired detective, asked late in life what case defined their career, hesitates before answering. They mention several, then finally this one. Not with pride, but with respect. It taught me patience, they say. And humility. The words feel insufficient, but they are true. As the years continue, society's relationship with justice evolves.
Technologie accélérate. Expectations rise.
Yet the core lesson of the case remains unchanged. Truth does not operate on a schedule. It emerges when conditions allow, not when demanded. The cold case label, once synonymous with abandonment, has been reframed. It now carries an implicit promise, not that every case will be solved, but that none should be forgotten entirely. This promise is fragile, dependent on resources, attention, and will. The case stands as evidence of what happens when that promise is honored, even belatedly. In the end, the story does not conclude with closure or triumph. It concludes with continuation. Lives lived forward. Systems adjusted. Memories carried differently. The violence remains part of the past, but it no longer defines the present. What endures is the knowledge that silence is not the same as resolution, and time is not the same as defeat. Evidence can wait. Truth can persist. And even after decades, when the world has moved on and attention has shifted elsewhere, answers can still arrive, quietly, imperfectly, but powerfully enough to change how the past is understood and how the future is approached.
This is not the end of the story.
It is the point where the story stops demanding to be told and begins simply to exist, embedded in memory, shaping choices, reminding those who listen closely that no question ever truly disappears. It only waits, patient and unblinking, for the moment when someone finally dares to ask it again.